Yesterday, Britain found itself close to the world. And no, I know what you're thinking, but no, it wasn't Rachel Reeves' economic failures leaving Britain uninvestable. I am, of course, talking about Britain's biggest airport, Heathrow, closed due to a power outage caused by a fire at the North Hyde substation on the main supply and the backup generator. It left the airport completely powerless. A clear failure has been made somewhere, but was it down to bad planning, or did net zero targets have anything to do with it? We'll be discussing it on today's show right here on InFocus with me, Curtis Hinton, and joining me on this week's panel is broadcaster and journalist David Atherton, and making his debut on InFocus, the journalist and podcast host Lewis Brackpool. Welcome both to the programme.
Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis.
Lewis, welcome. It's your first time on the programme.
Thank you.
And you're with a veteran of the programme.
Of course, yes.
If that exists as a phrase.
All is good.
Dave, I'm going to start with you. Usually insightful. Heathrow had a huge issue yesterday. With the whole situation, what's your take on it?
Broken Britain in spades, isn't it? Heathrow Airport is the second busiest international airport in the world after Dubai. We only recently lost that as well. And you have probably Europe's biggest and most important airport and hub closed down for well over a day. That's absolutely disgusting. Yeah. What an appalling indictment on our planning and the people that run this country. I'll tell you the one thing. I'll just slightly digress if I can. The one thing that really irritates me is, it was the way the Labour government wanted to blame it on terrorism.
Russia was thrown in the hat as well.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well. But when it comes to Axel Rudakabana, he wasn't a terrorist. Despite his Al Qaeda manual and the fact he was an Islamic convert. Never mind that. But as soon as something misinformation, disinformation, where we get SO-15 counter-terrorist squads down there. Yeah, of course it is. Terrorism, Putin, World War III, nudge. That's the
it's
way
like
I
they've
look
got
at
some
it.
sort of agenda.
Well, the Labour Party have an agenda. A political party has an agenda. Perish the thought.
Nick, what's your thoughts on it? I mean, it was like Dave said, it is a catastrophe yesterday. It makes us look as a country as a joke on the national stage, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And to push further into sort of the media aspect of this, everyone was to blame. To preface, we don't really know exactly. It's still ongoing investigations. But like you mentioned, Russia was thrown into this. A pedestrian electrical fault was thrown into it, along with net zero. Richard Tice went on to talk recently and blamed decarbonisation targets, claiming that it was net zero compliance initiatives that has led to this. We can obviously look into that. I mean, I was reading earlier on the train up here, Heathrow released a net zero carbon strategy document, which everyone can go and have a look and sort of digest for themselves, although it is a bit of a dry read. So
2022?
Yes, so it's very new.
Yeah, information's good.
Definitely. And there is a lot in there that could carry future fire risks anyway. Some of them being electrical network upgrades and the replacement of gas heating systems with electrified solutions. You've got battery charging stations for net zero. We've seen, especially in America, places where stations have been just, spontaneously combusting.
Yeah.
The big thing with electric vehicles, that kind of stuff. Increased use of biofuels and solar PV installations. So there's a lot of stuff that could carry these risks. There's also Putin being thrown into the mix, which is, it's kind of typical now. I mean, I've got a few headlines here. The Sun published, fears Putin may be behind Heathrow fire as chorus of experts warn Blaze, quote, bears all hallmarks of a Russian sabotage plot. You've had the Telegraph coming in saying if Russia was behind Heathrow fire, is that an act of war and all of this? So it's all drumming up this media narrative only weeks after Keir Starmer spoke about conscription, which I'm sure we're going to be getting into.
We will definitely get onto that.
It's terrible to say, but I wouldn't put it past this government to use this situation in an attempt to further justify whether it be the notion of conscription or further involvement in Ukraine, if they can't or won't disclose what actually really happened. But just to preface, we don't know as of yet.
Well, it is just juxtaposition, isn't it? If you go back 30, 40 years, it was the left who didn't want to go to war.
Yeah.
It was the left who didn't want to fight for their country. Now it's the other way around, isn't it?
Well, I mean, since Tony Blair, Alistair Campbell, they had a bit of a fetish in that sort of
indeed,
area, didn't they?
Well, just to add to what Lewis said on the biomass, apparently they still do have some diesel generators there.
Yep.
Which they and they try to replace them with this biomass thing. Apparently, the airport needs 1,000 megawatts of power every day, and all the biomass can do is 1.5.
Which would be safety for the airport.
Yeah, indeed.
Fire exit lighting up sort of thing.
Yeah.
Potentially at the maximum.
Yeah, indeed. Basically, the biomass stuff didn't work properly, and that seems to be the reason that everything went down.
Yeah.
It's why did they not test it properly?
Yeah.
Why don't they say, look, let's switch it off. We're having a little test at 3 o'clock in the morning. We're going to switch all the lights off. We're going to try the biomass thing here, along with the diesel generators, and see if it worked. Was that beyond the wit of man to do that?
Well, talking about that, obviously they claim that Heathrow did switch to the diesel backup generators, the net zero option, like the biomass. Are we going to go to Ed Miliband territory? We're talking I want to cross over to the Great British Energy.
The fox has seen the rabbit on this one, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Well, he claims there's going to be no cuts because it will cause a culture riot. I think was the words Ed Miliband said. This is just prime example, is at the highest level as well. £20 million a day it costs the aviation industry for Heathrow to be closed.
Well, this is it. And to add, I mean, net zero is the agenda. We've read all sorts of UN initiatives, net zero by 2030, and then it's 35, and now it's net zero 50. We're speaking off air about Formula One, seeing the net zero painted across, pit stops and things like that, which is a joke. But to add to that, net zero, for the government's point of view, is mostly pushing into this territory without understanding safety or business means. We'll be getting on to Rachel Reeves and things like that a bit later too. So, it all boils down to this real push of ESG, environmental social governance, net zero in its agenda anyway, without real... It's all about... The focus is just push this all through, without any means of safety, without any means of cost, and it's going to bring us poorer, colder, and of course with less fun, less safety.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
I want to ask you why. Why are we doing this? If what Lewis is saying is right, if we're pushing it through,
it's all about power control and raising your taxes, in my opinion. But not me. There's Lord Monckton is a climate change expert. Do you know how much world temperatures would go down if Britain became net zero?
hardly any.
0.001 degrees centigrade. Mm-hmm. And if the world went net zero, how lower temperatures will be?
Not so much.
0.1 degrees centigrade. Mm-hmm. This is not joined up thinking. I hate to refer to sort of the COVID disinformation that the government put out on the lockdowns and also the vaccine. Yeah. But it's beginning to look a bit like that. Our conspiracy theories, could well be proved easily one day. You look at the rubbish they come out with, like methane, flatulent cows, and methane. Yeah, for sure. Right, okay. Well, apparently, methane has a 10-year life cycle where it breaks down into water and carbon dioxide, which is absorbed by the grass, which is eaten by the cows, which then is excreted through bottoms and things like that, and becomes methane again. No, there is no build-up of methane in the atmosphere, and also as well. Let's go for Who knows what the percentage of the Earth's air is carbon dioxide?
0.004.
0.04.
04.
Okay.
Yeah, dash zero.
Those decimal
Too many
places
zeros.
Net decimal. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Do you know how that 0.04% is man-made?
0.01.
It's less than
That's a
less
guess.
than 5.
Yeah, so, the figures vary from 3 to 5%. Are you telling me that increase of 3 to 5% of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere?
And you have to break that down by nation. You have to
Yeah.
break that down by
indeed, yeah.
What I want to talk about,
industrialisation.
you brought it up, breaking it down by nations. I mean, amongst the world's biggest, China, the US,
China, yeah.
we are nowhere near in terms of what we put out compared to them, but we are the ones who seem to be doing the most. So see, the US at the moment, they've got Donald Trump in, they're kind of reversing some of that because he's kind of seeing through the rubbish.
Yeah.
But with China, we're putting solar panels on our schools, being brought from China, being imported from China,
Yeah.
and they've been built with using coal.
And the wind turbines as well.
And the,
read that
and
this
the wind, yeah. This week that was a story that came out about the wind turbines. It's just a load of rubbish, right? But why? What are they trying to get out of this? Money?
There's a big lobbyist and organisational green money they call it, where big organisations, hedge funds, and big organisations such as BlackRock, Vanguard, all of these guys really have bought into the whole green agenda, I guess, because it's very popular. We now are governed really by an activist class as opposed to actual competent politicians that care about their own nations. So really, it's all about big investment. So there is heavy investment in the sort of green sort of market, if you will. And it's ironic, isn't it? You see these hard left sort of hippies that go around to all these marches saying, yes, everything must be green, we must eat less meat, we must do all of these things. Yet their organisation, or the organisations that they claim to represent, are all bought up by big businesses, big hyper transnational corporations such as BlackRock and Vanguard. So is it any wonder that it comes full circle and the irony is just too big to even laugh at?
Well, indeed, it's the marriage of big government with big business, I think, is called fascism in any other quarter. If I can make the most general of points here, right in 1989, when between 1848, when the Communist Manifesto was first published, through to 1989, there was an argument which was the best economic system, socialism or capitalism. When the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, the West Germans were 3.5 times better off than the East Germans. There was a chasm in wealth between the two countries. And overnight, socialism, in a sense, intellectually, became redundant. The less the government spends and the more you give back to the people and the smaller the state, the more freer and richer these people are. Yeah. Which unfortunately no one's in practice has learnt the lesson. So the Marxists went back to basics, and if they couldn't run the country's economy, they take over all the institutions. The Marxists long marched through the institutions, and what a damn good job they've done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to add, though, there is the other side of cronyism and stakeholder capitalism now. That's become just all focused on transnational corporatism, and that's become the main thrust. So you've got the one end saying one thing, one end on the other. We like to think free of the markets, free of the people, but really it creates a chasm of stakeholder capitalism to sort of drive in. You could call it stakeholder communism if you really wanted, but really it creates that chasm. So there's both sides. I see, everything's socialist or everything's capitalism's fault, when really there is things such as cronyism, which is a big thing, and it leaves it open to exploitation. Where that's why corporations have come in, the monopolisation of big corporate entities are now basically running the joint, as they say.
Yeah. No, we got no chance at the moment, have we? It's,
Blackpilled.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you do all the other stuff that that the government's done. They're attacking farmers, so small self-employed people get taken over by the big corporations. That BlackRock, and Vanguard guys were in town, meeting up with Keir Starmer, and you can see they were bought in so you can buy up the farms. It all becomes corporate again.
Well, look at Dale Vince, what happened just a few months ago when he brought up the big solar land that he's going to be putting a load of panels down on.
They're eyesores.
And it's ruining British countryside.
Yeah, I know.
Talking about, just before we go back, I want to bring it back to Heathrow, but just before that, talking about the net zero. These are people who are preaching to everyone, you need to stop using a plastic straw. Something as stupid as that. But there's a net zero climate coming up very soon, and they cut down a part of the forest to do so.
I didn't know that.
Was that Brazil? Yeah.
It was in Brazil.
I didn't know
It was an eyesore, wasn't it?
They cut down the quite a substantial size of a forest, so the planes could land. You know those carbon neutral planes that don't produce anything negative for the world could land, so they could all talk about how good they are by not using a plastic straw.
You would have thought that if this was a catastrophe and that we're all going to be underwater in 10 years, that they'd at least do it over Zoom.
Exactly. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Well, by the way, the other point that was you should make is we have so-called global warming, but when are you comparing it to the medieval warm period, and also the Roman warm period where temperatures were significantly higher? And if you go back 120,000 years to the Eemian period, hippos, lions, and macaque monkeys used to stroll upon the River Thames. And they've even found hippopotamuses as far north as Worcester.
Wow.
Because the temperature was that warm in Britain.
And we had a higher carbon rate as well in the atmosphere as well.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
Higher.
Bringing it back to Heathrow.
Yep. We've got a long way.
If it is net zero policies, what do they have to do? They have to stop them, right? They have to revise them.
Yeah,
completely scrap it.
Yeah. I'm all in favour in scrapping net zero to begin with, because it's not feasible. I don't even believe in the whole we're accelerating too fast from it. I do believe, and this is my own opinion, and people are free to disagree with me all they like, but I do believe that net zero is one big scam. I believe that it's a big scam that's all to do with corporate power, corporate control, adding green levies, adding tax, and it's just another way to make money and have investors buy it all up.
Yeah,
you're nodding with that, Dave.
No, it's all about self-enrichment and power and control, exercise over the people. You notice that what was her name? Emma Thompson. She was on some green march a couple of years ago, and she was asked, did you reduce your carbon footprint by going cattle class? And sort of the snotty reply, the ITV presenter guy, oh, how dare you ask me that? Of course I didn't, Absolute, the epitome of hypocrisy.
What's worse, net zero causing this, which is something the government's implemented, or being attacked by Russia, supposedly, in this scenario?
Well, it would be Russia. However, there's two sacred narratives there. We've got to keep up the narrative about Ukraine involvement, and also the narrative of net zero, which has become a sacred cow. So it's a catch-22, that one.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
It's ultimately I think there's vulnerability, and whether it's net zero, whether it's Russia, there's a vulnerability that needs to be assessed, and it needs to be kind of British people. I think it's been played down in terms of the risk that this poses, because net zero has been put in everyone's towns. It's affected everyone. So if this is happening because of net zero, can it happen to something else, which affects a hospital? Can it happen to something which affects people's lives? This affected 200,000 passengers estimated, which...
That's the point, if that ever happened at a hospital, that would be catastrophic. Yeah. Your heart machines pack up, intensive care's all gone wonky. I was thinking another word there, but, you think about it, people up and down the country really need to make sure their systems are properly tested. Yeah. Obviously Heathrow was a complete and utter disaster.
And they were demanding it before, but even now they've got more evidence to do so, right?
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
So who's responsible? If it is net zero, does the government have to, do we as citizens have the right to demand explanations as to why we're putting these into place and proof that these are secure?
Of course.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, and it's not just this government, it was the previous government before. They were the ones that went along with the initiative from the United Nations, World Economic Forum, all of these, big cats. So, it doesn't fall down to necessarily one person.
So we can't blame Ed Miliband for this?
I mean, I'd love to. I'd love to, because I'm not a fan. But, we have to be realistic. It's not just Mr. Miliband.
Well, he's in charge of the mood music.
Yes, he is, but it's not just him. It stems back to the Tory party too. So we must remember that. Indeed, and to add, I don't know where we're heading with this. I mean, I always look at net zero and the topic of this all confused, because it seems to be more about investment as opposed to, actual, environmentalism, as you will. There's conservative environmentalism, which is a lot different. Countryside, making sure that you're not littering, the standard.
Yeah.
But then there's the bigger stuff, global warming, all of this stuff that can stem all the way back to the 70s, when I've even watched clips of Leonard Nimoy, God rest his soul, because he's not here anymore. I used to love him. Even doing programs where he talked about how America and the West in general are going to be in the next ice age, and that never happened. Same with Al Gore saying that we're all going to be underwater and everything like that. It's been the same thing day after day after day. But if you question it, oh, you're a climate denier, you're a this, you're a that. It's like, no, climate change is real in its sense. The climate does change, of course it does.
Several times.
Several times.
There was also that iconic photograph on the front of the Radio Times that was trailing a documentary on global cooling. Apparently the theory is about global cooling, was that because we were burning all these fossil fuels, all the smoke was going up in the air and blotting out the sun. That was the theory behind it. So my experts are just as useless as your experts,
And to add, Keir Starmer came into his tenure saying that he was going to be, or the Labour Party was going to be the most transparent government. And how's that been working out? We're not even a year in, are we?
8 months through.
Yeah,
8 months.
8 months, not even a year. Yeah. So,
Sure. Well, just very
it's part
brief,
of the Uniparty. So
very briefly, just going back to Assel Kabbalah, I know somebody who was closely involved in it, and the Labour government, Yvette Cooper was going to say it was going to be a terrorist attack.
Right.
But the police were, but Yvette Cooper stopped it. The Southport.
It makes it just makes it all. It's even worse, isn't it? That's the thing. The fact that they knew and they covered it up.
Yeah. And
that's why they're losing trust. That's why the people have lost trust in not just Labour, but politicians.
Yeah.
And that's why they're looking for a change.
Yeah.
And when what's happened recently has happened, it's what's annoyed me most about what's happened at Reform at the moment. We've brought it up the last few weeks, but it comes into they were the only option for millions of people. Yeah. That's why they were topping the polls. Now, we had a discussion before, polls don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily showcase the truth, of course, but you'd like to think that they're going to get a lot more seats than 5 that they got in the last election, obviously now 4. But people had a hope, and it's all just come crashing down on them.
Well, we know a story about that, don't we, Curtis?
We do.
We know, yes. We'll say that one for later on, but it was my organisation one night. But anyway, no, it's such a shame that one of the other things that came out recently from a report was our GDP. If we went fully net zero, our GDP would fall by 10%.
Yeah, I read that.
That's going to bankrupt the country.
Yeah. And we're already the poorest. We're not a rich country anymore. The statistics have shown that we're actually an incredibly poor country now, and people feel it. Yeah. You don't even need data and graphs to tell you how people are feeling at the minute. So, it's only going to get worse if they keep acceleration, and it's not looking good.
I'm sure I'll be saving more ranting material for the last item we're talking about.
Well, I do want to move on to the next part, and that is Starmer this week again saying that the peace in Ukraine is only going to happen with the coalition of the willing. The guy he stands next to who's allowing all those people to travel through his country to get to ours on a little dinghy, he says that with him, Ukraine will only have peace that way. He's saying boots on the ground whilst the US are talking about a peace deal with Russia. Why are they so obsessed with having World War III?
That's an extremely good question. I'm told Starmer knows how much he's hated in this country.
I'd like to think. I think even the stupidest of all person would understand.
Yeah, I know. Generally speaking, the left particularly live in an echo chamber where they're immune to opinions from outside, and when it bites them on the bum, they pay the biggest of prices, and it comes to them most unexpectedly. No, is this Argentinian moment where a very unpopular Argentinian junta invaded the Falklands, to improve its popularity. Is Starmer saber rattling, in the same thing, same vein sort of thing. So I think I look upon Starmer as a psychopath. I don't. He doesn't care about anybody in this country. All he cares about is his power, his influence, and what the world can do for him.
Yeah.
I think most people believe he's the worst prime minister ever in Britain.
Yeah.
He has few, if any, saving graces. And even I'm worried about Ukraine. What's going to happen? What's going to if we provoke Putin too much?
Do you believe that there is a potential chance of them provoking him to World War III, or is there a saving grace of Trump in the White House? There's only a certain amount Trump can do. Let's face it. Because of the whole NATO alliance, obviously the US is still, at the moment at least, part of NATO.
Yeah, I think it's Article 5 of the NATO treaty, whereby if one's attacked, everyone else is obliged to back them up.
Now, there is a thing on this, a caveat on that it's not necessarily in war, in physical terms with troops or anything like that. That could be finances, it could be anything.
Yeah.
So Article 5 is a common misconception that if they invaded a NATO country, the whole of NATO would go to war together. That's not true. It's a support. So US doesn't have to get involved military. They could just say, here's $5 billion.
Yeah, indeed.
And that's the thing. Obviously, it's a nice thing to think that you've got a nice unity behind you, but there is no. It doesn't specifically say in terms of military action. 31 years old, Lewis. You won't mind me saying that. If Starmer called upon you to, you know what the question is. I'll finish it. If he called upon you to go and fight for this country, for his United Kingdom, would you?
No. Here's the thing. I have been rattling my brain about this question of conscription. I've made it very, very clear online that I would rather take a prison sentence than to actually fight in this war. Why? Well, one, it could have been avoided. That's a big one. Boris Johnson went to Istanbul and spoke with Zelensky and the advisors and decided to change the outcome of that particular meeting. So it could have been avoided. Millions of Ukrainians have been killed, along with Russians as well, in a war that I think is being downplayed by the establishment and by the media because it is an extremely bloody and awful war. When you read articles like, for example, the RAF, talking about diversity, DEI, hires, and talking about how straight white men were down the bottom of the recruitment, and you're less likely to join the recruiting or the recruitment because you were white and things like that. When you're being treated like that by the establishment, by the government, and then all of a sudden, because they want to push a certain agenda or whatever it might be to continue this war, why then would I come back and almost with Stockholm syndrome and decide to sign up and fight for that? I'm more than happy to, and I would, fight for my community, to protect my loved ones, my friends, my cul-de-sac, my area, fine. But to go and fight on foreign borders for others, whether it be Ukraine or for Israel or whoever, I'm not interested. I'm sorry.
If it was Baroness Thatcher, would you still have the same opinion?
Well, what did Baroness Thatcher was doing? Was it the same outcome as this particular one? Was she doing the same? The Falklands, you brought up the Falklands.
Yeah,
I'm saying the
Falklands.
So the Falklands was a very, very different moment. I think, that's an interesting one that you brought up, actually, because I believe it's one of the only few wars in recent times that I believe was legitimate in terms
100%.
of self-defense.
100%,
I do agree with that. So the problem that I have as well is not only, and I'm not accusing you of doing this, but the media and a lot of other commentators on mainstream, channels would like to use the paradigm of World War II and various other wars to justify continuation. I've noticed this trend a lot recently. Every war is different. Every war has a cause and effect, and every war has different outcomes as well. So to keep using, because we know that World War II drums up this real emotional response, because we're very patriotic when it comes to World War II. And it's a way to manipulate people. And I've noticed this, that people will use that particular war to drum up this emotional response. And I keep noticing it now. And I'm not going to fall for it.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to fall for
I,
it.
I think possibly the difference here is that in World War II and the Falklands War, the goodies and the baddies were clearly defined.
Yes, clearly.
Yeah. Indeed, yeah. Maybe I'm no fanboy of Putin. He's a nasty dictator and a murderous nasty dictator at the same time. But he does have a point. I did some research a few weeks ago, and apparently Zelensky really has been pushing hard to join NATO and also the EU as well. I will say what happened. He deserved, but you have to say that he was partially the architect of his own downfall.
But NATO, have they got an element to play with that in terms of they are in having conversations? They aren't stomping out these rumours of that Russia could have a NATO country directly on its board, and that's what it doesn't want. It doesn't want NATO missiles right there, right?
Expansionism.
Yeah. No, if you look at the expansion of NATO since 1990. You can understand Putin paranoia to a certain extent. Again, I'm not supporting the guy at all, but I'm just trying to have empathy with his position, and so maybe what the problem is, probably also Ukraine's a nasty, corrupt country like Russia is as well. I can't really don't have time for countries like that. I would probably say 80% of my sympathies are with Zelensky and 20% with Russia and Putin. So somewhere, but No, we desperately need peace. We desperately need some Russian gas. The thing that will boost an economy is major factors that will boost an economy is lower energy costs, cheaper petrol, cheaper gas, cheaper electricity bills. That really can boost an economy.
And who do we rely on for that?
I know. Well,
Question with NATO.
Little windmill and some
It's a full circle.
Autocrats in the Middle East.
Well, we're a generator down at the moment, so we're going to be. We're lucky to have the lights on today. Do you think the US is a big part in a deterrent? So if the US were clearly not going to back NATO in terms of this whole coalition of the willing, as they're calling it, do you think that's really a deterrent without the US to not pursue active war with NATO countries?
We have to remember we're essentially a vassal state of the US. So whatever goes from the US, we kind of go with. However, it's proving to be quite difficult for the European Union at the minute. Even to little things, we talk about narratives, we talk about media and things like that, with the European Union.
Yeah.
It was considered a conspiracy theory not too long ago that an EU army was such a thing, but now it's let's remilitarize. Yeah. Let's, Ursula von der Leyen coming out and saying we're going to remilitarize the European Union and NATO and everything, and you're there going brilliant. So. Everyone was being called, including Farage, was being called a conspiracy theorist for even suggesting that an EU army was even on the cards.
Indeed. Yeah, Nick Clegg lied in 2015, 16, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
He lied for his teeth.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. So, the US is a very, very important ally, and to maintain that allyship is increasingly crucial. But we are essentially a vassal state of the United States. As painful as it is to admit, unfortunately, it is the fact.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you took the nuclear bombs out of the equations, and we didn't have the American support, Putin's tanks would be in London inside a week. I'd reckon. It's such his forces. But then again, he hasn't taken Ukraine, has he?
That's the biggest thing. The difference
that,
between this war and any other war is the nuclear threat in terms of a world war. I want to talk about in terms of probably the word lunacy. Donald Trump came in 2016. People are like, World War III is going to begin, that sort of stuff. He was the only president when the war started. He's now trying to end this war whilst you've got the EU and Starmer and now Carney in Canada trying to, what seems to be, prolong this war. Why is the media in the UK, specifically the UK, why are they so anti-Trump when it comes to the war? Because Trump is trying to get a peace deal. Why do you believe? What is their reasoning? What's their motive behind this anti-Trump movement when it comes to this war?
Well, they've hated Trump for a long, long time. Since before 2016, or as he started to, start his campaign just before 2016. We live in a tabloid journalistic state, essentially, where, it's not really journalism at the minute, it's activism. Yeah. And I think that's a key component in trying to understand how this media works in the country. It's tabloid. It's not journalism. So I think that's a key importance. They're forever going to hate Trump. Trump could end this tomorrow and everyone walks away smiling. They're going to find an excuse to say, well, he was actually mean to Zelensky by saying all these mean things to him when he came for his visit.
Sure.
You know, there's always something. So unfortunately, it just hurts the regime and the establishment or the media establishment's narrative. And, you know, you go against these sacred cows, you know, whether the truth is a prickly one or not, it's always going to be difficult for them to justify it.
Indeed, yeah.
Dave, you would have seen media change over the years more than what Lewis and I have done.
Yes.
Is it nastier today than it's ever been?
Nastier in what respect?
In the way of that, the professionalism seems to have disappeared, and it's more about, like Lewis said, it's more about the activism. It's more about people with an agenda pushing it rather than just saying...
in that case, I entirely agree with you. I should imagine that the starting off point was probably about 2010, when, for example, the BBC and CNN started going off a cliff edge when it was Gamergate when political correctness and wokeness.
Oh yes, I remember Gamergate.
First came about, and the way it accelerated over the last 20 years or so has been absolutely appalling for us.
And we've not really... you would have seen more presidents than we have.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
We've not treated a president this way for...
No. I remember when most of the stuff you read in the newspaper was literally... Well, I believed it to be straight reporting.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's got me thinking now. You look at the way the BBC handled the bombing of that hospital in Gaza, when it was actually, you know, it was a misfired, you know, Hamas rocket. You know, the BBC are all too eager to report it was Israeli. You know, that was blatant propaganda. You know, and recently as well, they've been caught with their trousers down. You know, when they aired that documentary, you know, of the guy who was the son of a Hamas agricultural official. Yeah. You know, it makes you think how much other stuff have they
has gone under without noticing. Yeah, of course, over the decades as well.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? You know, I suppose that's the wonderful thing about the internet. You know, that you can fact check these people.
Yeah.
And I think with artificial intelligence, you know, these facts I dug up today about net zero and things like I got them from artificial intelligence.
And obviously you backed it up though, but that's something I know you do. You do check that.
Yeah.
But of course, but the proof is that they're giving you the right facts. So
Exactly.
You're going to get to a point in a few months where you
stuff about world temperatures. I got straight from the horse's mouth, Lord Monkton. You know, is the paper, Dave. You know, so so I said no. Mainstream media will never cut Donald Trump. An easy. You know, they will never be nice to him. You could find a cure of childhood cancer, and they still find something wrong with it. You know.
Yeah. It's the same. Elon Musk is getting the same treatment now, though.
Yeah,
right?
I know. So welcome to the club. Yeah, you know. So fact checking these days has become so much easier with AI.
Yeah,
really has been done. You know. So I'm really pleased about this because you can just say, look, do it yourself. You know, if you Google something, that's still open to interpretation. If the artificial intelligence is by and large correct, it should be sort of 99% true factually, sort of thing. So,
and every update is just getting smarter and
smarter. Indeed, yeah. No, I think God blessing Donald Trump. I think he's broken the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
He's broken wokeness in America, and he's broken mainstream media in America. You know, and there's also rumours that Uncle Elon might be buying MSNBC.
I have heard these the rumours through. So again, what that's going to do, if he's still part of the government, for me, it does bring about a potential risk for the bias in terms of it's like within the broadcasting industry. If you have people lobbying and giving you millions of pounds to talk about a specific subject, you have to have the bias towards it. So there is that reach. But I imagine if that is the case, as long as Elon isn't part of that, yes, he owns it, but as long as it's clear that he has no involvement in it, there's probably not much of an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm quite sceptical of Elon, to be fair. So, you know, even though, you know, I'm liking what he's doing, but, you know, I feel like I still have to be sceptical because there is not a saviour, you know, in politics, in media. There's none of that. So you always have to be sceptical. AI as well, you know, I love AI, I use it a lot, but, you know, even at one point that can be turned and used against. So,
Yeah.
you know, we have to be very, very careful and still remain sceptical. Not cynical, that's different, but sceptical. I think a healthy dose of scepticism goes a long way, especially in this sort of sphere.
Well, absolutely, yeah. So, no, one of the things with my X account is one of my most successful stories are the stories that my followers send me.
Yeah, that's great.
Real
Real people. That,
exactly.
You know,
Sharing the real
You know,
stories.
Sharing the real stories.
there's a story today about a school in Hampshire at Eastleigh has cancelled Easter, and and having instead in June they're having a refugee awareness day. So that's got so far probably 300, 400,000 views already. So I was told it was fake news, but someone just
Verified it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Well, I want to talk about something else on the programme. A horrendous story. I'm not interested in giving that time, I'll be honest with you. It's just pathetic, isn't it? Is it not? Something like that. Cancelling in a Christian country Easter.
No, yeah. It was the Easter bonnet parade and the Easter service parade that was cancelled.
Disgusting. Should be ashamed of themselves. Rachel Reeves. We all knew that budget in October was going to be a fail for the country. I will put my heartfelt sadness out for Liz Truss because she was absolutely attacked for her. But for some reason, Andrew Bailey really, really fancies Rachel Reeves, clearly. Bank of England reduced its growth rate forecast from 1.5 to 0.75 in February. And the OBR cuts its expected growth from 2% down to 1%. We are looking at a failing economic nation, right?
Yeah.
We are indeed, yeah. Well, let's go broad first of all. Just do the macro stuff and come and hopefully with the micro stuff. There is, ever since the end of the demise of Baroness Thatcher, we've just really had social democratic economic policies. And the political class, believe they have all the solutions for the population in this country. We can do this, we can do that. Shut up and behave. You're not an expert. But the fundamental problem is that high taxes, high spending, and a low-skilled workforce. Thank you, is the way to go.
Yeah.
Now, this has been around since the end of Baroness Thatcher. As a classical liberal, the government should be spending the least amount of money that it can. It should be doing the least from a functional point of view, and it should be having the lowest taxes that they should have. And it seems to me they're completely the opposite at the moment. It's high taxes, high involvement in your personal life and private life. It's an absolute mess at the moment. And Rachel Reeves, that's the macro. And Rachel Reeves is even worse. The thing that is most worrying is our GDP per capita per head is 1.1% below what it was in 2019. We are poorer in the last 6 years.
But we've had COVID. They inherited a £22 billion black hole. It's Donald Trump's fault. This is all reasonable excuses.
Well, we know £140 billion pound black hole due to Labour, so I don't know what they're complaining about. And let me just very quickly add on that. We've now had 8 quarters of our GDP per head going down, and much of that is A, financial mismanagement, B, mass immigration.
Lewis, does it worry you?
Of course, yeah, of course.
We've got over 4 years left of this Labour government. Hopefully just maybe 4 more minutes of Rachel Reeves, but
you never know.
You never know.
Well, I think what's damning about this, with the growth forecast halving, coming out this week, it reflects how private investment is not only stagnant, but people aren't interested. People don't want to invest in the UK because of this. Ongoing inflationary pressures and low productivity growth, that's not good for a country, considering that we found out recently that we are in fact a poor country. Yeah. We're a very, very poor country. Labour at the start of their tenure said that they would deliver a pro-growth, pro-business agenda. Yep. Shock horror, the Uni Party has once again given the public false hope, obviously. High energy costs is a massive concern. UK industrial energy prices remain among the highest in Europe.
Yeah. The world.
In the world.
Yeah,
exactly, in the world. Making manufacturing less competitive. We spoke about net zero. Targets are driving up bills. That's only going to happen because they're accelerationists with this agenda. There are some, I've written down some manufacturers or some companies that have come out to say that they're not happy. Make UK repeatedly stated that industrial energy costs in the UK are disproportionately high compared to European counterparts. The EEF, Engineering Employers Federation, said that in February, so last month, in a briefing, they asked the government to, quote, rethink mandatory ESG-linked reporting for small to mid-tier manufacturers. Big concern. British Chambers of Commerce, so the BCC, warned that rising energy costs remain one of the top concerns, particularly in manufacturing, logistics and hospitality, citing green levies and compliance costs as a driving factor.
Sure.
So we know where we're going, we know where we're heading, and it's one of those things, obviously not to mention employment or employer costs, rising national insurance contributions, all of these things, pensions.
That's a job.
Well, they're set to push the pension age back even further, aren't they? They're set to bring that part forward.
Well, is that going to make a difference in this current state? In the long run?
Marginally,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's funny how they harp on, I'm sorry to say, it's funny how they harp on about how they're supposedly the party of the working class. No, actually, they're
the party of big business.
Big business, green extremists, activists, and obviously it's part of the Uni Party's agenda anyway. Liz Truss posted on X earlier saying the British people or the British public were lied to that our problem was not spending enough. The constant media and political narrative was of austerity. In fact, the economy was stagnating with high taxes, red tape, excess migration and net zero. To fix this, we will now be actual austerity, which is really horrible. And I think a lot of us, including myself, might I add, I think a lot of us owe Liz Truss a bit of an apology.
Yeah, I agree.
You took the words right out of my mouth on that one. Liz Truss, she was castigated at the time for her policies, but it was the only chance that Britain had that might actually return us to some degree of economic goodness. For example, when Baroness Thatcher came into power in June 1976, Lord Howe did the first budget. And at that time, the British net take of taxes was £80 billion. So all our revenue that came in 1979 was £80 billion. She obviously lowered taxes, introduced deregulation, and by the time she left office in 1990, the tax take had gone up to £200 billion, nearly three times. That is what you do. You compare us to Singapore. They are 50% better off than us per head, and they don't have any GDP debt. They've got a 1.7 billion American dollars sovereign fund, 1.7 billion in the bank. And the people from Singapore live 3 years longer than us. Healthcare is a lot more affordable. They're a lot richer. I remember reading at the time of COVID. Britain spends about 47% of its GDP, maybe a bit more now, it's spent by the government. In Singapore, they had a crisis. It went up to 18.18%.
Right.
And they still live longer, and they're richer. And so Liz Truss was stitched up by Andrew Bailey, the banking government.
And we spoke before, Lewis, before we came onto the programme, someone unelected with so much power on the economy. Let's look at the economy under Rachel Reeves. So it grew by 0.9% in 2024, up 0.4% in 2023.
Yeah, sure.
However, it slowed at the start of this year, shrinking in January by 0.1%. And obviously the OBR's 2% growth forecast slashed. Taxes, you mentioned GDP. Public debt is, so the borrowing is 12.8 billion above what the OBR predicted. 12.8 billion above. So public debt is 98.5% of GDP, levels not seen since the 1960s.
Death spiral. Mm-hmm. Death spiral.
I don't know there's more to say. I think we have been, figure of speech was stitched up in this way.
Yeah.
We mentioned about Liz Truss being ousted, unelected bureaucrats. I mean, it's the same tale. It's the tale of most Western nations now about unelected bureaucrats having more power than a representative that people have voted for, and what are people going to get out of this with regards to the economy, with regards to Rachel Reeves?
Sure. Well,
I just-
the OBR is a quango. Should be scrapped. Should be
Yeah,
scrapped.
of course.
Maybe the Bank of England should be scrapped.
I like the radical politics. It's very fun. It's very fun.
It's just basic capital liberalism 101.
Yeah.
This statement, which comes, is a spring statement. Now, I got a bit of aggro online because I called this an emergency budget. This just falls short of an emergency budget because there's no taxation. In essence, we've had worse. So if this is worse than some emergency budgets that have been put through, what they're doing.
Sure.
They are increasing wages, yes, but they are holding tax thresholds, which ultimately means to people at home, you do get more money, but they can tax you now more on it because they're not moving the thresholds up. So it stays at that 12,500.
Fiscal track.
So they're getting more money via tax that way. So
Yeah.
you are a little bit better off, but so are they. Under the Conservatives, they moved the thresholds during each year, which meant that it kind of went up, but we know it's now never in line with inflation, obviously, because we can't keep up with that, unfortunately, with the high rate of inflation in this country. Rachel Reeves can't have long left. She surely cannot in that. I mean,
You never know though, because people are talking about Keir Starmer resigning, and he's got to resign. Narcissists don't resign.
No.
They still think that they're on a clear path, and it's just a blip. It's just unbelievable.
do you feel at any point that the Labour MPs, because this is not what the Labour Party is known as. This is not what the Labour Party stand for. And a lot of those MPs who are on the backbenches are just genuinely working class people who have been there and elected now into this new seat, potentially for the first time. They know in 4 years' time that there could be a huge revolution. It's a time for them to stand up now and maybe in the next 4 and a bit years, turn the Labour Party into what the Labour Party is meant to be. Could you see them going into, I'm not quite sure, the Labour Party have the 22 committee or something similar, and giving no confidence votes in Starmer?
There's always a possibility, I think, but unfortunately, the Uni Party has a grip on our politics. We talk about first past the post or proportional representation. No, it's about the parties now. It's about their agendas are not too far between. The Tories are saying the same thing. You might have the odd person like a Robert Jenrick, who's kind of an enigma on his own there. The odd man out, but this is like with most parties. You get some that go along with the agenda and some that don't. But as a whole, it is a case of uni-party politics. And even I've seen, and I won't digress because of course, we could go on to a whole new subject with this one. But even with some defections to reform, such as Liberal Democrats and Tory MPs, and this is the reason why parties like this were at the start very, very popular. I think it was 87 seats they had for reform that came second during the last election. It's because people want to smash the uni party.
Yeah.
So this is what it's all about. It's all about uni party agenda, politics. And do I see some sort of no confidence votes from Labour MPs? I highly doubt it. You may get the odd one, but it's never going to be enough. I don't see Starmer, I'm sorry to say, I don't see Starmer or Reeves stepping down, although Reeves, it's more of a percentage chance, I would say.
Sure, indeed, yeah. No, I think Starmer's majority is far too big for him to have any sort of meaningful rebellions.
I mean, even those powerful MPs, prime ministers, Boris Johnson, he wanted to be a wartime leader. It may explain why he trashed the deal in Istanbul. But he fell on his sword eventually. He was forced to, don't get me wrong, but he fell on his sword. Even if half of those MPs at Labour did, you just feel Starmer would come out and reiterate all the rubbish he keeps doing now.
Sure, indeed.
I think they don't want to be embarrassed because they've only just got in. It's 8 months.
Have we seen a government fail so quickly?
No, so quickly.
Well,
I think
indeed,
they're hanging on for that because it's a pride thing, it's an ego thing, and
Yeah.
pride is only going to knock someone down, tenfold.
Well, that's party before.
Friedrich von Hayek, the economist, the Nobel-winning economist, said, "If socialists understood economics, they would be socialists."
We're trapped in this student politics paradigm.
Yeah,
aren't we,
exactly.
really?
But the point is, Rachel Reeves, let's face it, but when it comes to running the economy, being in charge of the help desk at HSBC probably gives her more qualifications than the most Labour MPs. The point I'm making here, the person who replaces Rachel Reeves could be even worse.
That's the fear, right?
You've got to get through all of them until you find a good one.
Yeah, exactly.
Fat chance, though.
None of the Labour MPs have had a business. The front bench have run a business. They have no experience. It's a kind of superannuated, well-paid dole office. The Labour MPs. They'd rather get you £70 a week. Allowance. Job seekers allowance. They're paying them £90,000 a year to not have a job.
Where do you think the economy is going to go? Do you think that Rachel Reeves has the capabilities to turn it round?
No.
Lewis?
No. Straight up. No.
The Labour Party. Yeah, the Labour Party and Rachel Reeves haven't got the first clue what to do and how to go about things. They set up. Is it 10 new quangos they set up? They're just
like
spending more bloody money.
Yeah.
Well, what do you should be cutting them. Who needs Ofcom?
Yeah. Increasing our national debt by funding these unnecessary.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's absolutely ridiculous. They still want to go out and instinctively spend more of our taxpayers' money on useless people doing useless things.
Whilst they
It's
take away the
exasperating.
pensioners,
Yeah.
the pensions, the winter fuel allowance.
£6.6 billion we spend on channel migrants every year. And you
1.7 billion was it? Read on 1.2 million migrants that are on welfare state.
Yeah,
1.7 billion a year.
So they think that costs $7 billion. So there's 13.
7.
Okay. The channel migrants themselves, hotel and accommodation and things like that, 6.6 billion.
That's it.
The 1.22 million migrants cost us an additional 7 billion.
That's it.
So you're talking about the best part of 14 billion quid.
Yeah.
Straight out the window.
Straight out.
Lewis, where can people find you online?
So you can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, Lewis_Brackpool. I'm on Instagram, I'm on YouTube, same name, Lewis Brackpool. You can type that all in, and Substack as well, which I am terrible at keeping up to date, but I will do better.
And you got a podcast?
I do, yes. I run a podcast called The State of It, just getting guests on and having a brief conversation. So that's going to be started up again very, very soon.
Dave, our viewers will know you very well, but just give them a reminder where they can find you.
Well, yeah, it's Dave Atherton 20 is my well-worn Twitter address.
Unfortunately, that is all we do have time for today. But before you go, many of you may have seen that online this week here at InFocus at Q's News, we announced something exciting. From the 7th of April, we'll be changing things up from our one programme a week, which goes out on Saturdays, as you know, to going live 5 nights a week. That's right, Monday to Friday, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. from the 7th of April. Until then, thank you to my panellists, Dave and Lewis, and of course for your company at home. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can do so on social media. Our new social handles are @InFocusQs.